Hello, students, and welcome to the 8.1 Reading Guide. New topic: the Roman and Byzantine Empires. And the Roman Empire begins is the lesson for today. One of the things that you need to remember is that the Roman people lasted for 2,000 years, and we do know that the Republic itself lasted for 500, and then for the other 1,500 is where Rome's government changed. So through war and diplomacy, Rome's power and wealth did grow rapidly. However, the Republic, the government, did not survive the change, and part of it was because of the civil wars fought with Pompey and Caesar and Mark Antony and Octavian. But it's just they were unable to keep the Republic as is, and so it was the longest lasting republic in the world for 500 years, hoping that the United States outdoes that and outlives it. But it's going to be tough for us because some of the people are researching reasons for the fall of Rome right now and comparing it to current issues in the United States. And the problems that we're having now after 240 some years are problems that the Romans had, in 500 years. And so you can see that it's an issue. It's a big issue. Hopefully, we right some of our wrongs that we have, and we can make it 500 years plus. So, who was Rome ruled by after the fall of the Republic? Well, it was by all-powerful individuals, pretty much a monarchy known as emperors. And what did they help bring? Well, they did bring on about 2 centuries of peace. Actually, things got really good for the Romans after the Republic ended, because it was a large string of some pretty good emperors. What did Octavian do in 30 BC? He took control of the Roman world. We know that he wins the civil war with Mark Antony when the dust clears, and he ends up being nicknamed Augustus, which means revered or divine one. And he's named that by the Senate. He's given that title by the Senate, and he becomes the first and actually one of the greatest Roman emperors. After Augustus won the civil wars, he brought peace to the Roman world. He took. Oh no, I'm sorry. It says he held. Yes, he held nearly total power. The Senate were basically puppets. He would defer to the Senate on certain decisions that weren't very large decisions, and the senators thought that he was keeping them in the loop as being part of a decision-making group, but it's not the case. Augustus had the power. He had the military behind him. He had the family backing. The senators basically would do whatever he wanted them to do. He did make the empire more stable. He shrank the size of the army and raised soldier pay. He fought against corruption, and he also gave the economy a large boost by bringing peace. One thing that I also know is that he brought a fire department, a full-time fire department, to the city of Rome, which was something that was really important as well. All right, after Augustus' death, he was actually made a god. He was deified, and he was actually worshipped. Most of the later emperors were also deified. Some of them are actually deified while they were still alive. They were made gods. Remember, the Romans were still polytheistic. Christianity was not an option at the time until a little bit later. It's actually after Augustus dies. It's during this time, actually, when Augustus is alive, is when Jesus of Nazareth is born, but Jesus' execution is not until this man is emperor. It's Augustus' stepson, and his name's Tiberius. And once this is passed on, this emperorship, it means that the Republic is now officially dead and that Rome is clearly a monarchy once Augustus passes the power down to Tiberius. Why was succession? And what succession means is a person who comes next. Let me underline that. A serious problem in Rome? Well, because Rome had no formal way to choose a new emperor, the members of the imperial family would oftentimes scheme and kill each other, actually, and sometimes the Roman army got involved to place the next emperor on the throne. Here in the United States, we're very fortunate that every 4 years there's a peaceful way that power is passed on from one person to the next, and that's not the case in all countries, even today. A dictator or an emperor or a king or a leader needs to be overthrown. In many countries, it's done through violence, and a new person is placed in charge. Here in the U.S., we're lucky that in our Constitution it's followed, and that we have a peaceful transition. Even if, let's say, the Democrats would win this election in November of 2020, this upcoming election that will be coming up to elect the President of the United States, Let's just say the Democrats end up putting somebody up that beats President Trump. President Trump will peacefully pass that power over. Let's hopefully peacefully pass that power over, just like President Obama did to him. It's one of the things that's very interesting and very noble what American government has in place. So, briefly detail some information about the following emperors. You don't need to know about Trajan so much as that he conquered new territories. You need to know that Hadrian was a well-traveled emperor that made sure he got around to all the provinces. But another important thing that Hadrian did is he built walls across the borders of the empire to protect the Roman lands from the non-Roman people. And actually, some of Hadrian's wall, pieces of it, are still there today. Marcus Aurelius, who is also known as Marcus the Wise, wrote a famous book about philosophy. And there also were some very idiotic and cruel emperors. Nero is one of them. He was very cruel. He actually, some Christianity began under his rule, and he actually persecuted the Christians. And he also killed Roman citizens and close relatives, plural, without cause. Augustus's rule began a long period of peace and prosperity known as the Pax Romana, or the period of Roman peace. One of the things about the Romance languages is that we refer to things as like the noun, then the adjective, the period of Roman peace. Where in this case, in all the Romance languages do it this way: Spanish and French, and of course Latin. They say Pax Romana, which this stands for peace. This stands for Roman. So the descriptor comes in front. It's the peace Roman instead of the Roman period of peace. So it's interesting how that's set up. But if you know anything about the Romance languages, if you study French or Spanish, you know that it goes in a different order than we would place it in English. What happened during the time period of the Pax Romana, which was around 200 years? People were able to come and go and live their lives in relative peace. There were no civil wars like there had been in the time period leading up to the Pax Romana. No major wars really threatened most of the empire, and it was a time of prosperity. Other than having a couple really strange and weird emperors during that 200-year time period, it would have been a good time to be a Roman. Like if we could create a time machine and go back in time, I don't think you'd want to go back to Julius Caesar's time because it was strife. There was civil wars. People were picking sides. There were assassinations and unsurety. I think if you lived during the time of Augustus on, it would be a good time to visit and a good time to be a Roman during these 200 years. It was the furthest expansion of the empire during the Pax Romana. They made it all the way and conquered half of Britain. They could not defeat the Scots, as I mentioned before, in the north. They made it all the way to Egypt and North Africa in the south. They made it all the way to the Atlantic Ocean. There was no other land to conquer in the west. And they made it all the way to Iraq in the east, which would have taken up the ancient lands of the Tigris and Euphrates, which you know as Mesopotamia. So these geographic barriers actually kept the Romans from expanding further. There were dense forests to the north of the Danube River, in which the Romans did not have any desire to conquer. There was the Atlantic Ocean, of course, to the west. There were deserts to the south and southwest, so the only room for expansion really was to the east. But there's a very powerful civilization out there known as the Persian civilization. They were the Sassanians, and the Romans had all kinds of trouble with them, and they actually could never defeat them. This is what makes the Iranians actually different than the rest of the Muslim world, because especially in the Middle East, mainly the Muslims are Arabs, but there's a different ethnic culture in Iran, which they are Persians. They are the leftovers of the Persian Empire, which you learned about last year. And the Romans were never able to secure this border. They had a lot of trouble with the Persians, we'll talk about later on. How was the saying "all roads lead to Rome" true? It is metaphorical and it's also literal. Literal because all roads, if you got on a road, it would end up leading you to the city of Rome, because the major roads extended out of the city like spokes on a wheel. More than 50,000 miles of roads crisscross the empire, which link cities and forts. And the Roman roads were built to last. Actually, some of them, including the main one, the Appian Way, is still used today. Well, the main reason the Roman roads were built was for soldiers. It was for soldiers to march quickly from place to place. But military engineers would travel along with armies, architects, stonemasons, and surveyors, and they would build the roads while the army would travel into different parts of the empire. And this is the influence of Alexander the Great for sure, because Alexander took scientists and map makers with him on his military expeditions because he was into the intellectual part of conquering land as well. The Roman roads were engineered. They were very hard paved and very well drained. However, smooth all-weather roads and improvement over the dirt paths, well, it spread up not only the military, but spread up communication, made government, and the big thing, I think, is trade. It made trade more efficient. And when trade becomes more efficient, you make more money. And they also helped, helped to get food from, the ports to the large inland cities, which Rome happens to be one of them. Well, concrete was invented by the Romans. Cement had already been around, but what's concrete is taking the powdered cement and mixing it with small stones, sand, and water, and you end up with a thick, soupy mixture that's poured into a mold where it ends up hardening. And there's a chemical reaction that takes place. There are still Roman concrete harbors that have survived more than 2,000 years. You'll be watching an Ed Puzzle video here in the next week or so that discusses this concrete and the chemical reaction that takes place that makes concrete harden. The concrete ends up being viable as long as the chemical reaction takes place in a strong manner. There are some Roman piers that are 2,000 years old, made of concrete, that the chemical reactions are still taking place that are hardening the concrete, which is something. It's just amazing that they can create some type of building material that's chemical reaction is still strong after 2,000 years. The thing about concrete was it was lighter and easier to work with than stone, and you needed less skill. Basically, you mixed it, you dumped it into a form, and you were able to make concrete structure, and it was easier than having a skilled artisan work with stone. And so using this new material, the workers could build large structures, and they actually ended up perfecting the dome. What did Roman soldiers and engineers build? It should say build. In addition to domes, they built large, sturdy bridges that were supported by these rounded, semicircular arches, and the arches allowed for longer and stronger bridge spans. What's an aqueduct? It is a channel that brings water over land. Characteristics: they were made of stone and concrete. About 80% of them were underground, but the most visible ones, of course, were the arcade ones that are above ground, and they built bridges across valleys. Some are still there today. 4 uses for the aqueducts: public fountains. Wealthy people connected them to their homes for sewage, public baths, and also sewers. And drinking water, of course, would be one of those as well. Let's talk about the Roman baths really quickly. They were an important part of Roman lifestyle. Many Romans went to bathe every day in the Roman baths, but it was so much more than bathing. There was exercising. They were able to visit with friends, and they even conducted business. A lot of that stuff takes place on the golf course today, and I think that the golf courses of today are the bathhouses of ancient Rome, where it was a gathering place. Business meetings would take place. Friends would go to connect with each other, and it would be more enjoyment and entertainment than actually the bathing. So it was much more than just being clean. It was the idea of the social interaction. And this happens with me at the YMCA all the time. I do love to go and I do love to work out, but I do love my bros there too. And I think seeing them every day, like you feel like, you're part of a club or part of a group. And I think that that's, part of the whole thing with the bathhouses too, that you felt part of something. All Romans did that, upper and lower class, by the way. What was the result of the Roman Navy clearing the sea of the pirates? Well, shipping had been very dangerous and expensive, but now once the Roman Navy was up and running, they were able to clear the Mediterranean of pirates, and now it was safer and faster and cheaper to move product by sea because you could load up the ships with the cargo and you could move more volume at a quicker rate by sea than by land. And so ships carried grain, wine, olive oil, and pottery all across the empire. So that's what the Romans sent out. What did they get back? Well, from India, they got medicine and jewelry. They had a high demand from China for silk, and then in Africa, from Africa, frankincense, and also animals would come from Africa. But still, the main form of creating money for the Romans was farming. Farming was the base of the Roman economy. Grains like wheat were key. Grain was shipped to Rome to feed its massive population, and imported grains also ended up feeding the Roman armies. One thing I do want to say about frankincense, and if you don't know about it, it's pretty much just something that smells good. And it supposedly, kind of helps you as far as like health-wise to, end up, smelling the frankincense or whatever. It's pretty much just like an old, ancient sort of, spice. It is obtained from trees, and, it was rare. So I think what happened was that people were, interested in the smelling of the burning of frankincense to, make your house smell good. And it was just something that was sort of new to people, so it ended up becoming in demand. How did money flowing through Rome change the life in the provinces? Well, it sure did, because the owners of farms grew very rich because of the demand for their product. People in the provinces started to prosper. Officials there started using money that was collected in the treasury to build temples, theaters, baths, and a lot of the Roman provinces building arenas, much like the Colosseum that was in the city of Rome. And then some elite officials in the provinces actually gained enough power to become senators or even emperors. Here in the United States, we have a stable currency. What is a stable currency? It's a system of money that does not change over time. It's more quickly and widely accepted in trade and in commerce. This is something that is nice with the American dollar, because our economy is so stable that you can take that American dollar and really try to spend it pretty much anywhere in the world. American money is taken almost everywhere, and the reason why, of course, is because it's a very stable currency. If you had tried to use pesos in the United States in a convenience store in the United States, they probably wouldn't take them. I think that the American money is almost the standard for money around the world, as far as like being able to spend it, when you go outside the country. Now, I do know that if you go to Europe or whatever, you normally would trade in your money, but for euros or for wherever country you are, their monetary system. But I do know that I've been out of the country, Mexico, and in some different countries in the Caribbean in particular, and American money spends very well there because of the stability of the monetary system in the economy. Well, Rome's stable currency made it easier to conduct long distance trade than it was in the past, because anytime you do not have to convert currency, it makes trade a lot easier. And I think that that's probably one of the main advantages of having a stable currency, that you can trade with other people and your currency is good and valid in their world. So that's it. I'd like to thank you for watching this Edpuzzle video. 8.1 is covered, and thank you so much.